My mom kept a ceramic rooster on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. It had a chipped beak from the time my brother knocked it off when he was 9, and she never replaced it or threw it out. She just kept it there, chip and all, for almost 30 years. That rooster was the first thing I packed when we cleared out her house in Sudbury. My brother didn't even notice it was gone. My mom was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's in the fall of 2019. I was 28, working as a payroll specialist at an accounting firm in Sudbury, renting a one-bedroom on Larch Street that I genuinely loved. I had a life. Small but mine. My brother, he's 4 years older than me, was living in Calgary at the time with his girlfriend, doing something in oil field logistics. He had a truck payment, a gym membership, and strong opinions about things he didn't have to deal with. When the diagnosis came in, my mom sat me down at her kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and told me before she told anyone else. That's the kind of relationship we had. She wasn't dramatic about it. She said, "I want you to know before it starts to show so you're not scared when it does." I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking lot of my building for a long time. My brother's response when she called him 2 days later was to say he was sorry and that he'd try to get back for Christmas. He did come for Christmas. He stayed 4 days, ate her food, watched hockey, and flew back to Calgary on the 27th. For the next 4 years, I was the one who took her to neurology appointments at Health Sciences North. I was the one who called her pharmacist when her medications changed, who installed the grab bars in her bathroom, who drove 40 minutes round trip twice a week to bring her groceries after she stopped feeling comfortable driving. I'm not saying this to make myself sound good. I'm saying it because it's what happened, and because it matters for what comes later. My brother came back maybe 3 times a year. A long weekend here, a week in the summer. He was pleasant about it. He'd fix things around the house, take her out for dinner, make her laugh. She loved him. I'm not going to pretend she didn't, and I'm not going to pretend those visits didn't mean something to her. They did. But he'd fly home on Sunday night and I'd be back on Tuesday morning helping her button her coat. In the spring of 2022, my mom's condition had progressed to where she needed more consistent support. I talked to my firm about going down to 4 days a week. They agreed. The cut in pay was real. I didn't tell my brother about it for 3 months, and when I did, he said that was really good of me and that he'd try to contribute more when he could. He sent her $200 for her birthday. My mom owned her house outright. She paid it off in 2014. 3-bedroom bungalow in the South End. Updated kitchen, decent lot. She bought it with my dad before they separated, bought out his share, kept it. In the Sudbury market, it was worth somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000, depending on the timing. She had an RRSP and a small amount in the TFSA. No debt. She had a will. She'd made it in 2018, before the diagnosis, with a lawyer named Desjardins whose office was on Elm Street. Equal split between me and my brother. I knew this because she told me. She was transparent about it, almost to a fault. She wanted there to be no surprises, no fighting. She'd seen what happened in her own family when her aunt died without a clear will, and she was determined not to leave that behind. What she didn't update was the beneficiary designation on her RRSP. That still named my brother from when she'd set it up years ago, before he moved away, back when he was the one living nearby. I didn't know this until later. My mom passed away in January of this year. She'd had a fall in November that led to a hospital stay that led to a care facility, and she declined faster than any of us expected once she was out of her own home. I was with her. My brother arrived 2 days before she died. He held her hand and cried, and I don't doubt that any of it was real. Grief is grief. I won't take that from him. The funeral was a Thursday. My brother had booked a return flight for the following Monday. On the Saturday, 2 days after we buried our mother, he sat down across from me at her kitchen table and said he wanted to talk about the house. I'd expected this eventually. I hadn't expected it on a Saturday, 48 hours after the funeral, while her reading glasses were still on the side table in the living room. He said he thought the cleanest thing would be to list the house as soon as possible, split whatever came in, and move on. He used the phrase, move on, twice in the first 5 minutes. He said he needed liquidity. He said he had some things going on financially that he didn't want to get into, but that a clean sale would really help him get sorted. He said he assumed I probably wanted to get back to my own life too. I asked him what he meant by his own life. He said, your apartment, your job, your routine. I said, my routine for the last 4 years had been our mother. He looked at me for a moment and then said he knew and that he was grateful. Grateful. I told him I wasn't ready to talk about the house that weekend. He said he understood and he topped up his coffee and went to watch something on her TV. I went to my old bedroom, which still had the same curtains from when I was 17, and I called my colleague Denise, who is a certified financial planner and also one of the most grounded people I've ever met. I didn't cry. I just said, I need you to walk me through what I'm actually looking at here. And she did. That call was 2 hours long. By the end of it, I understood a few things I hadn't before. The will split the estate equally. The house, as part of the estate, equally. The house, as part of the estate, would be sold and divided. That part I'd known. What Denise helped me understand was that the RRSP, because it had a named beneficiary, would pass outside the estate entirely. Directly to my brother, without going through the will, without being divided. Depending on the balance, that could be a significant amount going to him that would never be counted in the split. I didn't know the balance offhand. I had to find the paperwork. I found it in my mom's filing cabinet, in a green hanging folder labeled Finances, in her handwriting. The RRSP balance as of last statement was just over $91,000. I sat on the floor of her office for a while. My brother would receive $91,000 outside the estate, and then also receive half of everything inside the estate, including the house. I would receive half of the estate, because I'd been named equally in the will, not preferentially, because she hadn't updated it, because she hadn't known she needed to. I want to be clear that I don't think my mom intended this. I don't think she sat down and decided my brother deserved more. I think she made a will, felt settled about it, and didn't revisit the RRSP because it wasn't something that came up in her day-to-day. Beneficiary designations are easy to forget when you're not a financial professional. She wasn't. She was a woman who kept a chipped ceramic rooster on her windowsill because throwing it away felt wrong. What I do think is that the outcome, unintended or not, was deeply unfair. And I was allowed to feel that. I also want to be clear that what I did next was not about revenge. It wasn't about punishing my brother. It was about not walking away from 4 years of my life having absorbed all of the cost while he absorbed none of it. I went back to work that week, and I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Theodora. She specialized in estate law and had an office on Durham Street. I laid everything out for her, my brother's share of the RRSP passing outside the estate, the 4 years of reduced income, out-of-pocket expenses, the unpaid labor of caregiving. She listened, and when I finished, she said, "Are you familiar with the concept of an equalization claim?" I was not. In Ontario and in many Canadian provinces, there are legal mechanisms that can allow a caregiver, particularly one who has made demonstrable financial and personal sacrifices, to make a claim against an estate for compensation. It's not automatic. It requires documentation. It requires that you can show what you contributed and what it cost you. It's not always successful, but it exists. She also mentioned something called unjust enrichment, which is exactly what it sounds like. A legal argument that one party has been enriched in a way that is unfair relative to another party's contributions. My brother was about to receive $91,000 that our mother almost certainly would have split had she understood how beneficiary designations work. Whether that met the legal threshold was something we'd need to examine. I left her office and drove to my mom's house, which was still technically part of the estate, not yet listed, and I sat in the driveway for a while. My brother called me that evening. He'd been talking to a real estate agent, he said, just to get a sense of timing and pricing. He said he hopes that was okay and that he wasn't trying to rush me, he just wanted to be informed. He hadn't mentioned the RRSP. He hadn't said, by the way, I received $91,000 that you didn't know about. I want to factor that in as we divide things fairly. He hadn't offered to adjust. He was talking to real estate agents and hoping I'd be ready soon. I told him I was also doing some research and that I'd be in touch. Over the next 6 weeks, I put together a document. This is the part that was tedious and necessary and not at all cinematic. I went through my bank records for 4 years. I calculated the mileage to every medical appointment, the cost of the medications I'd covered when she ran short, the grocery runs, the co-pays I'd helped with before her drug coverage kicked in properly. I pulled my pay stubs from the years I'd gone part-time and calculated what the income difference had been. I talked to 2 of her doctors who were willing to write brief letters confirming the nature of her care needs and the consistency of my involvement. The number I arrived at, conservatively, was a bit over $47,000. That's what I'd spent or foregone being her primary caregiver. I sent the full package to Theodora. She looked at it and said it was solid. She said it wasn't guaranteed, these things rarely are, but that we had a genuine case for an equalization adjustment, and that the RRSP beneficiary issue strengthened it considerably since it made the original equal split effectively unequal by a large margin. She wrote a letter to my brother. I want to tell you what it was like to wait for him to respond to that letter, because it was not comfortable. I did not feel powerful. I felt sick, honestly. He's my brother. We grew up in the same house. He used to let me ride on the back of his bike when I was too small to have my own. There was a version of this story where I feel nothing but righteous, and that was not my experience. My experience was that I sat with a lot of grief and a lot of ambivalence and a very steady, quiet certainty that I was not wrong to ask for this. He called me the day after he received the letter. His voice was different than I'd expected, not angry, strained. He said he didn't know I'd been keeping track. I said I hadn't been, at first. I said I'd started putting it together after he mentioned needing liquidity 2 days after the funeral. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The RRSP, I didn't think you knew about that." I said, "She had a filing cabinet." He didn't say anything to that. The conversation was long and not easy, and I'm not going to recount all of it. What I'll say is that at no point did he tell me I was wrong. He pushed back on some of the numbers, said some of the expenses I'd included felt like a stretch. We went back and forth. He said he'd had his own costs, flights, the time he'd taken off work. I didn't argue with that. I said, "Put together your documentation and we'll factor it in." He couldn't produce much. In the end, we reached a settlement through the lawyers. Without going into every detail, the value of his RRSP benefit was partially factored into the estate distribution, and I received a caregiver adjustment that acknowledged the financial contribution I'd made over 4 years. The house sold in April. When all of it was settled, I received meaningfully more than 50%. Not dramatically more. Not some punitive amount. An amount that, to me, reflected what had actually happened. My brother and I have not talked much since. We texted on our mom's birthday in March. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I said I hoped the same for him. I meant it. There's a house across from where I work on the corner of Mackenzie and Larch that has the same aluminum siding as my mom's bungalow. I notice it every morning on the way in. I don't know if that will stop eventually or if it's just going to be a thing now, where certain colors and certain roof lines are going to pull at me for the rest of my life. The ceramic rooster is on my windowsill now. Chipped beak and all. I thought about getting it repaired, and then I thought, no. She kept it the way it was for a reason, even if she never said the reason out loud. Some things hold their meaning in the damage. I think about fairness a lot lately. Not fairness as a concept, but fairness as a practice, as something you have to actually reach for. Because it doesn't just happen. It doesn't settle into place on its own. Nobody was going to hand me what was right. I had to show up for myself the same way I'd showed up for her, with receipts and records and a very good lawyer on Durham Street. My mom would not have wanted us to fight. I know that. I also think I have to believe that she would have wanted me to be okay. I'm okay. There's a version of the story where I come across as calculating, where I'm the sister who kept spreadsheets and called lawyers and got more than her share. I thought about that version. I understand why someone might see it that way, but here's what I actually know. My mother didn't raise me to be passive about things that mattered. She raised me by example, and the example she set was quiet and consistent. She showed up. She kept her commitments. She didn't wait for someone to notice how much she was carrying. For 30 years, I watched her do the right thing without making a performance out of it. That's not nothing. That's actually a kind of integrity that's harder than it looks, because nobody applauds you for it, and sometimes nobody even sees it. What happened with my brother wasn't the result of him being a bad person. I want to say that plainly. He made choices to stay in Calgary, to send money on birthdays, to keep his life at a comfortable distance from the hard parts of ours. And those choices had consequences he didn't account for. Not because consequences were imposed on him from outside, but because choices accumulate. They compound. The years I spent driving her to Health Sciences North didn't happen in isolation. They happened because someone had to, and the person who didn't was him. That's not a judgment. It's just the shape of what occurred. I think about the 4 years often, not with bitterness, but with a kind of clear-eyed recognition that I didn't fully have at the time. When I was in the middle of it, rearranging my schedule, recalculating my budget, installing grab bars on a Saturday morning, I wasn't thinking about fairness. I was just doing the next thing that needed doing. That's how caregiving actually works. You're not heroic. You're just present. But presence has a cost. And I think one of the most important things I've learned from all of this is that it's not wrong to name that cost. It's not grasping or petty to say, this is what I gave and I'd like it acknowledged. Denise helped me see the financial picture clearly. Theodora helped me understand what legal options existed. But the harder work, the part nobody could do for me, was deciding that I was worth advocating for. That's the part I had to come to on my own. There's a kind of strength in that isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just holds. My mom kept a chipped rooster on her windowsill for 30 years. She never fixed it and she never threw it out. I used to think that was just her being sentimental. Now I think she understood something about damage, that it doesn't have to be hidden or erased to be livable, that you can carry what's broken and still build something intact. I'm not the same person I was before she got sick. I'm more careful now. More clear about what I value and less willing to let silence stand in for fairness. That didn't come from a book or a philosophy. It came from 4 winters in Sudbury and a ceramic rooster with a chipped beak and a lawyer on Durham Street who asked me if I knew what I was worth. I did by then.